Hello, and thanks for coming to Cornwall Alliance's 16th birthday party, right there in your own home. Tonight, we're going to have some fun reminiscing about how the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation got started and what have been some of the milestones of our history. If you'd like to read up on our history, you can go to our four-part series starting at Cornwall Alliance blog, and you can see a whole lot of what we have done in the past. Lots and lots of folks have been involved over the years, and you can see a pretty complete list at our About tab, the page called Who We Are. Our advisors, fellows, adjuncts, scholars, and contributing writers number almost 70 from various subfields of science and economics and religion. Tonight, three colleagues join Director of Operations and Communications Megan Kinard and me, three scholars who have been involved for a decade or more and whose encouragement and counsel have been crucially important to our success as an educational ministry. Dr. Roy W. Spencer, Dr. David R. Legates, and Vijay Jayaraj. I'll tell you more about each of them and ask them to introduce themselves later. First, though, let me say a huge thank you to all the folks who responded to our invitation to help us celebrate our birthday by meeting two challenge grants by anonymous donors that resulted in tripling the first $5,000 donated and doubling the next $20,000. Megan, would you give us a quick update on that?
Sure, Cal. As of this afternoon, we received 98 donations, totaling $23,199.98, with promises from others that over 6,000 more is on its way. So as a result, including the two matching grants, total birthday giving will top 60,000, which is a tremendous boost to us, and going into the last 4 months of 2021. And it's the most we've ever done in a summer giving campaign ever. So thank you so
Fabulous.
much, everyone.
Thank you so much to all of you. So now let's bring on our first guest, Dr. Roy Spencer. Roy is a principal research scientist in climate science at the Earth Systems Science Center at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's a NASA award-winning scientist and co-author of many peer-reviewed studies, or outright author of some of them, who with his colleague Dr. John Christie handles NASA's Satellite Global Temperature Monitoring System, the world's best, most accurate way of tracking global temperatures 24/7, 365, at pretty much all altitudes all over the world. It's the best way to put claims of dangerous man-made global warming to the test, comparing the output of computer climate models with real-world observations. Roy, you were involved in the first meeting ever of what became the Cornwall Alliance about 2 years before we got our permanent name and incorporated. It was a gathering of just a couple of dozen people in a conference room in Washington, D.C. in October of 2005. There you gave a presentation that included your quoting from a song about clouds by the legendary pop singer Joni Mitchell, Both Sides Now. In fact, as my memory serves, you even sang a few bars for us. I didn't know it at the time, but that reflected the fact that you're an accomplished rock guitarist yourself. So tell us, Roy, how did Both Sides Now fit into your presentation on climate change 16 years ago?
Well, most of the work that we've been doing on climate research, Cal, with NASA and the University of Alabama in Huntsville, has been looking at the effect of clouds on the climate system. We know that clouds cool the climate system on average. But it's interesting that the UN's IPCC, which we'll be discussing later, the organization that gives us the official international view of scientists on climate change, thinks that as the climate system warms from adding CO2 to the atmosphere, that clouds will, instead of cool the climate system, will act to enhance the warming. And that's something that we've worked on for a lot of years, and we continue to work on it. And I'm not the first one to point out that clouds are so complicated, that song by Joni Mitchell, Both Sides Now, the lyrics I've looked at clouds from both sides now. I really don't know clouds at all. That's very apropos to our understanding of clouds now, because after over 30 years of research, we still don't know the extent to which clouds will change to either enhance warming from increasing CO2 or mitigate it.
I remember a particular article that you and some co-authors wrote about cloud feedback on the climate system. And in it, you indicated that by means of some of the research you did with the satellites, you found pretty good evidence that as the surface warmed, typically clouds responded by changing so as to limit that warming rather than multiply it. Rather than being a positive feedback, they seem to be a negative feedback. But hey, Roy, you want to just sing a few bars of that for us? Come on, give it a
Oh,
try.
no, I'm not into karaoke. I could pull out my guitar and strum something for you or pick something for you, but no, I'm not much of a singer. So no, we're not gonna go there.
Well, you actually did. I don't know if you hummed it or you sang it a
I
bit, but
I Cal, I honestly do not remember that, but the older I get, the worse my memory is.
yeah, well,
Or the more
I've looked
convenient.
at clouds from both sides now, from up
There
and
you go.
down, so somehow it's clouds illusions I recall. Ooh, I put that way too low, didn't I? I really
Yeah.
don't know
I
clouds at all.
really
Anyway, I
don't
remember you
know
doing that one.
clouds at all. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah,
I
it's still
thought, wow,
true.
this is cool. Here's this scientist who's singing folk song as part of his formal presentation on climate science. Well, thanks very much. Uh, Now I just want to go in and just kind of run through a few quick things about Cornwall Alliance's history. In a sense, we almost got our start clear back in 1999 at a gathering of about 35 scholars brought together by the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty at West Cornwall, Connecticut. The reason I say that is that after that meeting, a small handful of us thought, hey, we had some really good ideas there. Why don't we put them together in a simple 2-page statement of principles? I wound up being asked to draft that, and it became what was called, and still is called, the Cornwall Declaration on the Stewardship of Creation. We made that public in the spring of 2000 and started right off the bat with over 1,500 signatures of mostly religious leaders from all around the world. In the years after that, it gathered many thousands more signatures. We had intended to promote that through an organization called the Interfaith Council for Environmental Stewardship, or ICES, ICES, but that really never quite got off the road. Instead, in 2005-06, a small handful of us, especially encouraged by my late friend David Rothbard, who was one of the founders of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, and his colleague Craig Rucker, who had been friends of mine since the early 1990s, they helped me start what we initially called the Interfaith Stewardship Alliance in 2005-06. In fact, Megan and I were talking a couple of months ago about, have we ever thought about celebrating Cornwall's birthday? When would Cornwall's birthday be? And the earliest I could find that maybe could be called a birthday for that was an email dated August 31, 2005. So that's 16 years ago from today, in which we actually set forth the ideas of how to start the organization. Well, that was really well timed because just a couple of months later, another organization called the Evangelical Environmental Network released what they called their Evangelical Climate Initiative with a document called Climate Change, an Evangelical Call to Action. That came out in late 2005, and the EEN tried to use that to get the National Association of Evangelicals to come on board the sort of the global warming alarmist bandwagon. Well, I knew, and a lot of other people knew, that there just wasn't solid enough scientific information on that, scientific evidence for it, to warrant an organization like the National Association of Evangelicals, speaking for millions and millions of people who are members of uh, dozens of different evangelical denominations, to come out and take a hard stance on the issue. So we put together, and by the way, I'll just mention this. The EEN's document was written by an ethics professor who, when he later debated me on the issue, mentioned as we were walking toward the debate stage that he had never realized how complex the climate science was until he started preparing for the debate, which was, a little funny. Granted that he had thought that it was fine for him to write a document and this declaration that he hoped would be signed by major Christian leaders putting their reputations on the line. But at any rate, we had a number of outstanding scientists and economists working with us on that. 4 of us wound up authors. I was the theologian type involved. Paul Dreesen, an energy policy analyst, was a co-author. Roy was a co-author. And then Ross McKittrick, an environmental economist from the University of Guelph in Ontario, was a co-author of what we called A Call to Truth, Prudence, and Protection of the Poor, an evangelical response to global warming. That very quickly gained the signatures of about 150 evangelical scientists and economists and theologians. We didn't go for college presidents, mission presidents, mission organization presidents. We went for people with actual scholarship in the field, and we got that. So we felt like this was a good way to respond. That led to the debate I mentioned a minute ago at Union University, where David Gushee was an ethics professor in the fall of 2006. And we might get some idea of how the debate came out by realizing that David and I had an agreement in advance that we were both welcome to distribute a DVD of that as we pleased. And David's never done that. I have. It was, in many ways, people just said, hey, this was no contest. And I think the reason is that I had people like Roy Spencer, especially at that point, giving me so much advice. I mean, Roy provided me a lot of good ammunition. It also led to my being invited to testify as an expert witness on the ethics and economics of environmental policy, especially climate and energy policy, before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. So those are a few of the things that happened early on in Cornwall's history. So, yeah, Megan.
It was before my time, so I've been wondering what it is about the EEN's Evangelical Climate Initiative that made you so determined to launch a solid reputation and bring on experts like Roy Spencer, Ross McKittrick, and Paul Dreesen.
Well, for one thing, it clearly embraced the whole alarmist understanding of climate change, or global warming as it was more routinely called at the time. And it asserted that the world's poor were going to suffer the most from man-made global warming. Well, that's probably true, but it's also true that the world's poor suffer the most from malaria and droughts and floods and practically anything else you can name, except, I suppose, crashes in their Maseratis. The poor suffer the most from things precisely because they're poor. But as we pointed out in our document, A Call to Truth, Prudence, and Protection of the Poor, actually the poor also stand to suffer the most from policies meant to fight global warming, because those policies will greatly increase the cost of energy, which is absolutely essential to lifting and keeping any whole society out of poverty. And whereas they had drawn on the efforts of essentially one ethicist, who, by the way, later embraced same-sex marriage and various other things that indicated that he wasn't really very biblically founded, we brought together the work of climate scientists and economists and theologians and biblical scholars to have a really solidly scholarly document that provided a different perspective, both by saying that man-made global warming, though real, was probably fairly minor, certainly not catastrophic, not an existential threat to humanity, but also that the policies meant to curb it would do far more harm than good, especially to the world's poor. So this was why we got involved, and we quickly got the cooperation of people like the late Chuck Colson or James Dobson, my former chancellor of the seminary where I taught, Knox Theological Seminary, Dr. D. James Kennedy. But we also got a good many climate scientists and others, and that was sort of what got us started building our group of scholars, our network of scholars that now numbers almost 70. Now, we want to bring on another early partner in the Cornwall Alliance, Dr. David Legates, who's just now retiring from his long-term position as professor of climatology and geography at the University of Delaware. David is author or co-author of numerous peer-reviewed studies in climatology. He's the former Delaware state climatologist and co-author with Dr. Anthony Lupo of a brand new third edition of the late Dr. S. Fred Singer's fantastic book, Hot Talk, Cold Science, Global Warming's Unfinished Debate, which is available from the Cornwall Alliance's online store. David, the first thing you did for us actually was a lecture on global warming for our video series released in 2009 called Resisting the Green Dragon. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be a climate skeptic and what it means to be a climate skeptic, and how you communicated that in your lecture for us clear back in 2009.
Well, I wish I'd known Roy was a guitarist and at UCal could sing. We could get Megan and Vijay and I could drag up my old saxophone and we could have a jam session. But I guess barring that, yeah, I'll tell you the mundane story of how I got here. Essentially, I didn't want to be a climatologist. Nobody in the late 70s did. I mean, nobody knew what a climatologist was. I wanted to be a weather forecaster. I wanted to work at an airport forecasting weather. And I applied to 3 universities, Penn State, University of Delaware, and the University of Maryland, and was accepted at all of them. And I went to Delaware, and they said, we don't have a MET program, but we have a guy that teaches meteorology. And so it was John Mather, who's a famous climatologist. And I talked to him, and he essentially said, you don't want to do weather forecasting. It's going to be shift work. The big issue in the 1980s and beyond is going to be climate change. That's the kind of thing you should be getting into. Maybe he's giving me a line. I don't know. So I went over to Maryland. I walked in literally off the street, and I asked to talk to somebody. And they set me in front of this older gentleman. And it turned out it was Helmut Landsberg, who's another famous climatologist. And I said to him the same thing, and he said, no, you don't. And we don't do you want to get into climatology. That's going to be the big thing in 1980s and beyond. And we don't do that here. I'd encourage you not to come to the University of Maryland. And I said, well, I'd applied to Penn State. And he said, all they do is weather forecasting up there. You don't want to go there either. And I said, well, this is interesting. This is the kind of thing I heard from John Mather at the University of Delaware. And he said, I just reviewed that program. You'd be smart to get in on the ground floor of that. And so the punchline is, I've never been to Penn State.
You mean you've never been to the home of the
Michael Mann? No.
Michael Mann?
I have not been to, no, never seen a football game.
You've never been to Penn State or in the state pen. That's what you're telling me.
Well, that'll get us in trouble. So I probably shouldn't mention that. I'm in enough trouble as it is. But to answer your direct question as to how I became a skeptic, I mean, the idea is, I was trained with John Mather, Court Wilmot, and Court one day said to me, he said, you've ruined your career by this climate change stuff. If you'd have just gone along with the rest of the consensus, think of the career you'd have. And I, said to him in no uncertain terms, essentially, that's not how I was trained. We have to look at the data. Yeah. We go where the data tells us. You don't make up stuff for political purposes. And that's essentially why I am where I am. I haven't seen the proof. I know he made a statement, my advisor to students one time, that he couldn't understand a lot of the climate change stuff. It just didn't make sense from a climatological standpoint, but he was a progressive. And so therefore he is excited about the policies that it's being used, but not about the science. And I was neither excited about the policy nor the science, but the science in this case was important to me, and that was what I had to go with. And since it didn't say that humans were an existential threat to the planet, I don't think they are.
You mean to tell us that some people let their policy preferences determine where their science goes?
I can give you lots of ideas on that. I mean, when the funding drives saying that humans are destroying the planet, when the university's telling you bring in as much money as you can, it's almost impossible for a young scientist now to get started and to take the view that humans aren't a major agent of climate change. I mean, they just will never survive.
So scientists are not all doctors, Mr. Spock from Star Trek, absolutely objective.
They're not all, logical. How can I say it politely? They're not all honest, scientifically honest. Ooh. Let me say it that way.
You mean sin is an equal opportunity employer?
Apparently it is, in many different realms.
All right.
Cal, can you do the hand signal?
I cannot.
What's that?
Oh. Can anybody else do the hand signal?
Yeah, let's see.
Yes.
Yeah, let's see. There we go. Okay, so our third guest tonight is Vijay Jayaraj, who writes articles for us regularly on climate change and energy policy, especially from the perspective of someone who grew up and lives in India, a developing country, whose people stand to suffer greatly from policies that rich Western nations try to impose on them to fight global warming. Vijay earned his master's degree in environmental science, specializing in climate science, at the University of East Anglia in England. He reached out to me right about the time of ClimateGate in 2009, saying he'd love to work with the Cornwall Alliance. And then he went on to further studies in climate science at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Vijay, tell our audience what's ironic about your having studied at the University of East Anglia, and what was ClimateGate all about? How was it important to the public debate over climate change?
Hello, Cal. Thanks for having me during the birthday celebration. Yeah, when I joined the University of East Anglia, I was quite unaware of the importance of the climatic research unit that is responsible for temperature data sets. So the whole ClimateGate fiasco happened while I was there, but I did not understand the depth of it until I graduated, and I put in a lot of time understanding what it was. So yeah, I wanted to study in a university that is quite reputed for climate change science, because in the late 2000s it was already in the news, and in 2007 we had Al Gore's The Inconvenient Truth, which kind of spurred the global warming movement. So it was natural for a young graduate student to aspire to work in a field of environment where he gets to contribute to the society. So that was my whole plan, and understanding that the University of East Anglia is quite good with their environmental department, I chose to study there. And like I've been to the climatic research unit to meet some of my professors. So it was a very good experience for me to be there, and and I had no idea that I'd be in the campus when this whole ClimateGate fiasco happened. So for those of the audience who might not be aware of what it is, emails from the scientists who worked in the climatic research unit were leaked or stolen, however you may put it. So and some section of the media and the commentators believe that there was deliberate ploy to adjust the data in order to project an unprecedented warming. So that was ClimateGate, and it happened in 2009-10, the same year I studied there. And yeah, so after that I began to question some of the claims, and I found out about Cornwall Alliance. And what I liked about Cornwall Alliance is that they had a commitment in getting out the truth on climate change, and that, when coupled with their passion to eradicate poverty in third world countries, was something that really attracted me. And that was one of the reasons why I contacted Cal and asked him if I could contribute in some way to what Cornwall is doing. And that set the whole part partnership, or me knowing about Cornwall and contributing to them. That's all. That's where it all began. Yeah.
Thanks, Vijay. Appreciate that. Roy and David, another project you worked on with us was a renewed call to truth, prudence, and protection of the poor, an evangelical examination of the theology, science, and economics of global warming, which we issued late in 2009. That document had 10 co-authors and 19 reviewers, and you were co-authors of the chapter on the science of climate change. That came out not long after the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its fourth assessment report. Roy, tell us a little about the IPCC, how it works, and what are its strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, well, by way of background, the IPCC is basically where all of the information that people hear about climate change, what climate change is going to do globally to their country, that's where it all originates, is from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was formed in the late 1980s. Now, that organization was formed when I was working for NASA and was pretty heavily involved in selling NASA to Planet Earth to Congress. We were trying to get funding to launch satellites to study climate change. And during that time, I got to talk with a lot of bureaucrats, and it became pretty obvious that the IPCC was not a grassroots movement by scientists who were concerned about global warming. It was formed by bureaucrats, politicians, and environmental activists who, along with what David Legates said about getting funding, they had control over the purse strings and congressional funding of scientists in the United States. And they coerced scientists into joining the IPCC to write periodic reports to say how bad global warming is. Now, over the years, these reports, if you go into the hundreds of pages that were actually written by the scientists, are not terribly alarming.
3,949 pages in the one that was just released a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, these reports, if you were to ever read into them, aren't that alarmist, okay? What happens is that the bureaucrats who control how the report is presented to the public and to the media, they twist the results to sound even more alarmist. And then the media further exaggerate what the reports say, and they get environmental activists and a few scientists that are really out on the fringe to come on TV and talk about it. And the result is the public gets a very biased and extremist version of what's in the IPCC reports.
Let's try to bring on another person. Yeah. Um, Pardon me for getting distracted there. I am probably one of the world's worst organizers, and I just got reminded a few minutes ago that I left somebody out, and that's Kees van Kooten, who is a professor of environmental economics and the Canada chair of uh, climate and something or other. Anyway, he's been a contributor to one of our major papers as well, and I had asked him to come on the program, and then I forgot. I'm so terrible at these things. I forgot to put him in the list to receive links. So I've asked our producer, the wonderful Jim Moline, who is very, very patient with me, to see if he's able to bring Case in after all. And we'll see if we can manage that. That would be good because Case wrote a marvelous chapter on the economics of climate and energy policy for another of our major documents, uh, A Call to Truth, Prudence, and Protection of the Poor, 2014. The case against harmful climate policies gets stronger. So if indeed we're able to bring Case in, we will turn to that. But for the moment here, let's see if I can find the note that I just dropped on the floor. It's a birthday party, you know. um, David and Roy, let's see. Uh, where are we here?
The IPCC and how it was formed. I just finished discussing how it was. Yes.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Roy, getting me back on track. David, the IPCC is treated by the media all over the world as sort of the infallible, absolutely authoritative source about climate change. And its publications are treated as if they were holy writ. Why shouldn't the media handle them that way?
Because it tells them exactly what they want to hear. It plays right into the mantra. It's right down exactly what the media want to hear. So the media are going to just expound on it. As Roy said, the media are going to bring in people who will even go stronger than the IPCC writes, if that's even possible nowadays, and then just expound upon what's going on. It plays right to what they want to hear, and so that's exactly why they play to it.
Yeah, you know, each year, typically in late November, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change holds a global summit on climate change. They call them COPs, or Conferences of the Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And by some strange coincidence, it just seems that the IPCC's major assessment reports always come out just a few months before that, so that they can provide some ammunition, some real backing for the policy agendas that have already been written in stone before these meetings even begin. David, talk just a bit more about how all of that works. How do the different parts here fit together in terms of the framework convention, the intergovernmental panel, the media, the politicians who head up the various countries, the bureaucrats that they appoint to the IPCC? How does all of this work together? And why is that kind of a structure almost guaranteed to result in some serious problems in terms of truth telling?
Well, I think that's one of the places where we really want to defund the cops. But in any event, sorry, I apologize. But the idea is that, you know, it all wants to come with funding. And so part of the idea of the IPCC being part of the UN is really to beat the developed nations over the head and make them give sort of the money to the developed nations and, of course, to the UN to sort of do wealth redistribution. It's the Robin Hood aspect of the United Nations. But essentially, that's the way it plays out. is that it's not just simply we produce a document that says bad things are about to happen and then make the countries go off and do what we think they will do. We actually have a framework that they will sign into that therefore will set them up so that they will do exactly what we being the IPCC and the UN, want them to do.
That's really interesting.
Okay. All right.
Cal, I have a question for you.
Yeah, Megan.
And it's another question from before my time. Obviously, the Cornwall Alliance is dedicated to educating the public and policymakers about biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the world's forests, and the gospel of Christ. Although probably the most visible part of our work deals with climate change, which is obviously an earth stewardship issue. We're also quite concerned about how environmental policy affects the poor, which I think is the thing that is probably closest to my heart and yours as well. We used to have a sister organization that dealt directly with that. Can you tell us about that and your role in it?
Yeah, my good friend David Rothbard, who died a few years of cancer, wonderful Christian man, had a real heart for the poor, both that they should hear the gospel and that they should be given the best opportunity that they could have to lift themselves out of poverty. And so, having founded the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow with Craig Rucker back in the 1980s, David, at about the same time that we were starting the Cornwall Alliance, started another organization called Churches and Villages Together. Churches and Villages Together created partnerships between churches here in America and remote villages in Uganda, places that didn't have any electricity, didn't have any running water, and so on. And in these partnerships, the churches would provide mentoring and some funding, but mostly not money, much more in the way of mentoring, to train up new pastors, young men who would be trained simultaneously in biblical studies and theology and pastoral work and so on, and in how to be agricultural entrepreneurs, to start their own farms and to build those farms up in some pretty amazing ways. We had as a model for all of that a man named Edward Cassaja. He was a veteran pastor and veteran entrepreneur, a leader in the Presbyterian Church in Uganda. And his integrated agricultural enterprise in Kampala, raising chickens and cattle and pigs and so on for meat, and chickens for eggs as well, cows and goats for milk, raising vegetables, fruits, grains, not only fed his multi-generational family, a very large family, and a lot of hired hands who worked with him, and provided products for the market as well. And the fruits, the grains, the vegetables also fed the livestock. And he had brilliantly designed all of this so that the enterprise was entirely cycle through, with rainwater from roofs stored in cisterns for livestock, or sluiced to wash manure into fields for fertilizer. Absolutely nothing on Edward Cassaja's farm went to waste. Everything got used. Even the chicken litter not only fertilized fields, but also fed cattle and pigs. And the profitable business enabled Pastor Cassaja to hire others, to pastor First Presbyterian Church of Kampala without burdening it financially. He took no salary and so on. So the aim was to develop young men to follow in his footsteps, to start similar enterprises in or very near very remote villages in Uganda, and be able simultaneously to bring the gospel to those villages, and then to shepherd the flocks of God in those villages, and to start their own entrepreneurial enterprises and employ people from the villages, helping them to rise out of poverty by productive work. So this is just something that I thought was a great activity, and so I was glad for Cornwall Alliance to partner in that. In fact, it even brought to my wife and me the opportunity to go to Uganda and see some of these places. I was able to preach in a couple of the different churches there. We met a number of the major Christian leaders in Uganda, and were able to talk with them through the whole concept of combining spiritual with economic outreach and ministry there. Now, another milestone, though, I mean, that trip to Uganda, by the way, was in 2012. But another milestone, a really important one to me, came in 2014 when a young lady named Megan Toombs joined the Cornwall Alliance as communications and outreach coordinator. And she's been with us ever since. Megan, tell us a little bit about how that came about. She's become integral to our success and moved up to the position of director of operations and communications, handling almost all the business end of the Cornwall Alliance, which is a really good thing because I am a lousy businessman, and making sure that I don't go off track a whole lot. So Megan, how did that come about? I mean, what was it that so attracted you to the Cornwall Alliance that you were just determined to work with us?
Well, the sad fact is I needed a job and you were offering one, um, which is the truth of it. I didn't know anything about environmental policy at the time. My degree is in foreign policy, which I still truly love the aspect of what we do that deals with sort of the mix of environmental and foreign policy, particularly people in poverty. So at the time, I was just looking for a full-time job that had career prospects. And then obviously I'm here almost 8 years later. So I clearly found the right fit for me.
Well, there are thousands of jobs available out there. How did you
Not in
come to know
2012, there were
about
no. When I graduated in 2012, there was not much. Now there's a lot of jobs out there apparently because a lot of people are hiring, but and can't find anyone. But you know, 2012, 2013, 2014. I don't think there was a lot.
Didn't you learn about us through Summit Ministries,
I did.
wonderful
Yep,
worldview teaching ministry out in Manitou Springs?
I did. I am an alumni of Summit, so they have a good network that can kind of keep everyone in touch with job prospects, especially for those of us who would like to work for a Christian ministry. It's a good opportunity to find things.
Yeah. Well, what do you consider to be the most rewarding parts of your job here now with Cornwall Alliance?
I think probably most definitely the most rewarding is getting to know our supporters. I've had so many incredible conversations with people from all over the US and other parts of the world. I can't remember where I was a couple of years ago, and somebody just yelled out my name. And I turned around and it was someone I'd never seen before. And they're like, "You work for Cornwall." I was like, "Yes, I do." Like, I get your face in my emails all the time. So that's definitely the best part. I've even gotten child rearing and teething advice from people, which has been incredibly helpful. So it's definitely my favorite part.
You know, that's one of the things that I really like about working with Cornwall Alliance too, is just the way that so many of the different people with whom we communicate, they reach out personally and they really care about us. I mean, I have
Yes,
no idea how many people there are praying for us, but I know it's a whole lot of people, and they tell me
thousands.
so frequently. So
Yes,
it's tremendously encouraging. And part of it too has been just the friendships with the people who voluntarily work with us. I should mention this, by the way. Roy Spencer, David Legates, Vijay Jayaraj, all these other people listed in our network of scholars on our Who We Are page, we don't pay them anything. they do everything they do for us out of the kindness of their hearts. We don't do that because we haven't got any great big checks from big oil or big coal or anything like that. And I guess they haven't either. Have you, Roy, David, Vijay, got any checks from ExxonMobil?
Still waiting.
Still waiting. Yeah, well, that's the accusation all the time, but the fact is that that our folks do what they do out of integrity and a love for the truth. So, Megan, what are some of the things that Cornwall has done on a regular basis since you joined us 7 years ago?
We've done, well, a lot of things. I mean, there's no way I could even mention them in the short time we have left. But one of the things we do regularly is we provide guests for talk shows, particularly radio shows. We've done probably thousands since I started, many hundreds at the very least. We provide speakers for churches and other events, both here and abroad. You know, Cal, you've traveled abroad. You've been to Africa and you've been to Rome, I think. And maybe a few others. Are there a few others?
Yeah, I've had the privilege, the joy, the aching back from many hours in in airliners to speak in Europe, in Asia, in India itself, in Africa, in the Caribbean, and all over the United States. At one point, had a great deal of fun doing a goodness gracious, it was a month-long trip starting in Phoenix, Arizona, and going from there over to San Diego, and then all the way up the West Coast, speaking at churches, schools, colleges, and whatnot, all the way up the coast to Seattle, and then from there, going through Idaho and Montana to attend a conference of the Foundation for Research on Economics and Education just outside of Yellowstone National Park. So it's been a tremendous opportunity for me to just build relationships with people in all sorts of different settings and bring Cornwall Alliance's message to them. Excuse me. One of the things that we've done a lot of too is providing guests for radio talk show hosts who want to talk about our issues. Quite a lot of our different scholars have done that. I've done a good deal of it. In some years, I've done as many as 300 or more programs in a single year. So that's been a lot of fun too. Another thing that we do is to exhibit at conferences, often conferences at which we provide speakers. We had a great time at a Freedom Fest conference where Megan explained our work to lots of different visitors at our booth. We wound up with some photos from that, but couldn't get them into tonight's program. Another conference at which we've exhibited several times is the Watchman on the Wall conference, put on by the Family Research Council and another organization that partners with them. At the moment, I can't recall the name, but they bring well over 1,000 pastors from all over the country together to the DC area for briefings, for teaching on how pastors can have an impact on public policy issues through the proper teaching of their church members. So
another thing we've really enjoyed doing, Cal, are the homeschool conventions.
Yeah, that's been a lot of fun because I think we have a lot of really helpful information on our website, hundreds and hundreds of articles. I've totally lost track of how many articles we have, but also a large number of major papers. and of course, some videos and the like that we offer that are very useful for homeschoolers. So we've exhibited and spoken at homeschool conventions, curriculum fairs, and the like in Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, a number of other places, and that's been a lot of fun. Great
We'd
way
love to
to
expand
build new
that.
connections.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been instrumental in putting those together, Megan. Thank you.
Well, they're some of my
Um,
favorites. I was homeschooled, so it's just a fun place for me to be.
yeah, and
We
my
also
wife and
don't,
I homeschool ours. Go ahead.
right. But we don't just exhibit at conferences. We provide speakers. For instance, Roy, and David have all spoken several different years for the Heartland Institute's International Conferences on Climate Change, which you are, and I think Roy, you two, and maybe David are going to speak this fall at. Could y'all talk a bit about why those international conferences on climate change organized by the Heartland Institute are important, and what do they do for the climate skeptic community?
Well, the Heartland conferences are sort of a counterpoint to the IPCC. You know, the IPCC only allows those climate scientists who believe in catastrophic global warming to play in their sandbox. A number of scientists who originally were with the IPCC have resigned because they consider the IPCC to be too extremist. So the Heartland started organizing these international conferences on climate change where skeptical speakers, including skeptical scientists like myself and David Legates, were invited to come give talks outlining the science behind a skeptical view. And the skeptical view generally isn't that there is no global warming. It's that global warming isn't nearly as bad as what everyone is claiming it is. And in fact, increasing CO2 in the atmosphere might be a net benefit for humanity and for life on Earth, since it's required for life to exist on Earth.
Yeah. David, do you want to add to that?
See, I'm just saying that is a heretical statement that usually comes out if you tried to mention that at a normal meeting somewhere. And so that's where the Heartland comes in, is they allow people to show different points of view, particularly points of view that don't get mainstream airplay, and in particular allow you to communicate with people as well, you know, who believe the same way. I mean, I go to American Meteorological Society meetings and occasionally American Geophysical Union meetings and talk to other people as well. But this allows for a forum where actually I can present, whereas usually I'll be blackballed in the others because they don't want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah. One of the things about the Heartland conferences is that, frankly, Heartland welcomes people with the opposite view to come there, not just as audience, but they're always trying to get what we might call climate alarmists to be willing to come and present their own papers, their own lectures there. A few times, some of them have taken up the offer, but for the most part, I think the others are cowards. They're not willing to come.
They generally don't want to debate, right? And generally, they don't want to debate. I say generally they don't want to debate because, in particular, I know where many debates have taken place and they don't look good at the end.
Yeah, that reminds me of the fact that the Cornwall Alliance has had a standing offer for what is it now, about 12 years, I think, to debate Catherine Hayhoe, who's kind of a main spokesperson for the Evangelical Environmental Network's position on these things. She speaks at colleges and churches all over the place, and she's in the climate alarmist camp, so to speak. And starting with an article about a decade ago that David and Roy co-authored, responding to an open letter that Hayhoe had been involved in putting together. We've had a standing offer that if Hayhoe, or for that matter, anybody else, climate scientist from that perspective among evangelicals would find not just one climate scientist, but also an economist and a theologian to debate with us. We would provide a climate scientist, an economist, and a theologian, and we would pay the travel expenses and the meals, the lodging, and even the honoraria for the speakers on both sides of such a debate in order to bring the folks together. Unfortunately, there's been no response. We've repeated the challenge quite a few times and had no response to it. We mentioned earlier that we produced a video series called Resisting the Green Dragon. That had 12 lectures by 9 different scholars. And since then, we've produced 3 other documentaries and a large number of short videos, all available on our YouTube channel. Megan, tell us a bit about one of those that involved Vijay a great deal.
That one, Vijay and I created a video series with a little bit of back and forth, a little bit of interviews called India at the Crossroads. And it featured how climate and energy policy impact poor countries like his own native India.
So Vijay, tell us a little bit about what you were working at getting across through this series, India at the Crossroads.
Yeah, so this particular series was aimed at giving people an introduction about the truth on climate change and some of the policy prescriptions that are originating from the United Nations IPCC and how it impacts the uh, people in India. So it had videos talking about the history of India, the economic growth there, the present reality of the people living there. So and also it talked about some of the achievements in the past 3 decades. So it was meant to be a snapshot of what's happening in developing countries and where they stand when it comes to the modern climate change movement and the restrictive energy policies that are being hurled towards them. So it was more of an introduction, an insight into the developing world and their challenge facing climate politicians from the West. Yeah.
Yeah. Vijay, what do you encounter in India? Um, we've talked a little bit about it tonight about how, at least in the Western world, climate alarmism is sort of the automatic position for an awful lot of people. How does that go over in places like India? Is there a real difference there?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that in quite a number of ways. But when it comes to understanding the issue of climate change or what it means to the society, we don't have much knowledge out here in India. For instance, a news media channel in India uh, merely republishes some of the alarmist articles originating from, say, New York Times or BBC or CNN, and they don't even have a specialist reporter or a journalist who writes on these subjects. So, and for an average news consumer, be it a rich person or a middle income person, they consume this news as fact. So they don't have time to research or put their time into this. Whatever is established as truth and whatever is established as the way forward when it comes to climate change in the West is also perceived as the way forward in India by the people. But when it comes to the government and the people who are dealing with practical solutions to life, such as generating energy, being in charge of economic growth, they understand that the climate alarmist movement and the policies that are originating from the West does not help India's case, especially when you have like millions in poverty. We are talking about the size of US population being in poverty, and the situation is much worse in Africa and some of the cities in Southeast Asia. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's the reality over here.
Yeah. Yeah. That, frankly, is probably the main thing that has motivated me all the way through the entire, goodness gracious, 25 years or more that I've been uh, fighting this battle in one way or another, even before the Cornwall Alliance got started, is my concern that so many of the policies promoted by rich Western nations would slow, stop, or even reverse economic growth in developing countries, just condemning billions of people to more generations of abject poverty and the the disease and premature death that come along with that. So, you know, we all want to try to do our best to combine passion and compassion with logic and hard scientific evidence and the like. Uh, we are whole persons. We're not Mr. Spocks. We are not computers. We have souls. We have minds. We have hearts, and we have to somehow bring all that together. Uh, David and Roy and Vijay, I wonder if each of you would have a little bit of a closing comment for us, not necessarily little, okay, but say a bit about what is it that has kept you involved in this battle for a long time, though the odds seem immense against the position that you represent? And what are your hopes for the future? What do you see as hopeful indicators instead of, frankly, discouraging ones? Uh, David, why don't you start off?
Yeah, I guess this is sort of an answer to prayer because back in the early 20 teens, I was looking for a group to connect with that could foster climate and my Christian faith. And uh, magically, you sent me an email about that. I won't say magically, it was divine providence, but essentially, I got your email and it essentially went from there. I mean, my concern is exactly what the concerns we have is that science is being abused, that essentially we need to care for others as well. I know there's a lot of concern about creation care, and I won't go into that, but some of you know the example there. And that then essentially what we want to be able to do is to take care of all the other human beings as we're commanded by God. And so I think that's been the blessing for me is that it's been a vehicle to combine my Christian faith, my science, and my concern about my other human beings all in one package.
Hmm. How about Vijay? How about you? What do you see as hopeful signs? What's empowering you to stay in the struggle against the odds?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it empowering. I would more call it as a practical challenge, a reality, because I live in a developing part of the world and there are power cuts every day, and still a lot of work to be done when it comes to securing uninterrupted power supply to people, hospitals, and I know from statistics that sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, uh, is much worse. So for me, it's more of a reality. I see this over here, and my question in my mind is always why are coal plants being shut down, and why are politicians in the West seeking to disrupt every form of energy that actually can help developing nations to um, become economically better. And the ironic thing is that these are the same conventional sources of energy that help the West attain its superior state of economy that it enjoys right now. So those questions like stay in my mind. for me, it's not of a reach where I have to conceptualize or think about why I need to be doing what I'm doing, but it's more of a practical thing. And for instance, the person who's in charge of the COP26 meeting doesn't even want nuclear power to be showcased in the conference. So those questions, those things raise a lot of questions in my mind, because we here in southern part of India enjoy nuclear power, and we are building a lot of reactors as well, and they provide uninterrupted electricity, which could mean the difference between life and death for a baby who's born in a hospital without electricity supply or interrupted electricity supply. And for even in our agriculture sector, our manures are produced from uh, plants that rely on fossil fuels. So life, fundamental support for economic progress in the 21st century is through fossil fuels, and so living in the situation and looking at the challenges around me is something that drives me to keep focusing on bringing out the truth regarding climate change, not just the science of understanding it, but also how the policies that are justified using that science is impacting the people here. Yeah.
Thank you, Vijay. Roy, how about you?
Well, Cal, as you know, my motivation over the years has been both scientific, like David Legates mentioned, that a lot of the science, excuse me, a lot of the science of climate change is exaggerated towards the alarmist end, which has always bothered me. Now, that's something that maybe a scientist could ignore if they're willing to just go ahead and keep getting funding to continue ignoring that. But like VJ's talked about, and you've talked about, Cal, there's the policy issue, that the policy changes, the energy policy changes that have been promoted from the beginning of this whole thing that started back in the 1980s, this climate change push, the policy changes have been in the direction that will enhance poverty. And we already know that poverty is the leading cause of premature death in the world. Okay. We do not currently have the technologies to replace fossil fuels yet. Maybe someday we will. I mean, nuclear, as Vijay mentioned, is a clear choice with the history, but for some reason the environmentalists don't want it. I have given a number of talks over the years where I've laid out the skeptic's case that climate change isn't nearly as bad as what people think. We don't know how much of it is due to humans. I'm guessing at least half, but the change is so small that it's like, who cares? And at the end of my talks, I will engage people asking questions from the audience. And on a number of occasions, what they finally fall back on, the most adamant environmentalists in the audience that I speak to, they will stand up and say, yes, but aren't there too many people in the world anyway? Now think about that. I think this is the ultimate goal of the people that are behind this. And this is not a safe thing for me to say because it will be denied. But I've seen too much evidence over the years that these climate change energy policy goals are meant to help depopulate the earth. And that is the goal of some of the people that are behind this. I mean, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theory. I've just seen too much evidence. As one anecdotal story, in the early 1990s, John Christie and I went to the White House to talk to Al Gore's climate advisor, science advisor, Dr. Bob Watson. Bob Watson was the one who basically spearheaded the push to stop the manufacture of ozone depleting chemicals, Freon, because of the fear of the ozone hole and ozone depletion in the stratosphere and all of that. We went to visit him in the early 90s when the IPCC was really ramping up. And he sat behind his desk. I still remember this. He sat at his desk at the White House with his feet up on the desk, which is okay. I do that too. And he said, we successfully phased out Freon. Carbon dioxide is next. That's what he said.
Because
Well, that the government wants to regulate carbon dioxide, which is produced by fossil fuel use. They want to regulate it one way or another. I don't know what the motivation is, whether it's global depopulation or being able to tax the private sector more, because they can always do a carbon tax, right? They can increase the cost of all of the fuels we use through a carbon tax, which of course isn't paid by the petroleum companies or the coal companies. It's paid by the consumer of the energy. So I don't know exactly what the reasons were. Who knows how government works? But it was clear that they were putting the cart before the horse. Bob Watson was instrumental in forming the IPCC. He was one of the first directors. And here he's telling me that basically the IPCC wasn't being formed so that we could examine the science of climate change to see how much humans are causing climate change. The IPCC was formed so that scientists would support the policy goal of reducing CO2 emissions.
The goal that was already set before looking at the argument. It's kind of
cart before the horse.
Aim, it's yeah. And I cannot agree with you more, Roy, than I do about your observation of the fact that so much of this is run by a really anti-human, depopulationist sort of an agenda. And you don't have to think of this in terms of conspiracy. It's a shared understanding of human beings as basically consumers and polluters. We're using up the Earth's resources and we're poisoning the planet while we're at it. That, I think, just completely ignores what we really are. I mean, God made us in his image to be creative and productive as he is, to be good stewards. And our stewardship, our dominion over the earth, to choose the term out of Genesis 1:28, should reflect God's, so that we are working to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors, addressing the two great commandments, to love God and to love neighbor. But unfortunately, I think a very anti-human attitude underlies a great deal of the environmental movement. You hit the nail right on the head, Roy, and I am very grateful for your doing that. Megan, got a few words here?
Well, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us for our birthday celebration. We're Sweet 16, which is pretty exciting. It's good to see you, Vijay, David, and Roy, and as always, Cal. Good to see you too. And I want to say thank you to everyone who donated to ensure that we can collect the full challenge grants from our 2 anonymous donors who promised to match all of your gifts. And this is a really big deal for us. We don't do a lot of fundraising, to be honest. As far as staff time goes, we focus on other things. And fundraising tends to be a little bit of an afterthought for us. So this is a huge deal, and we are very, very grateful.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Roy, David, Vijay, you have been wonderful this evening. One quick reminder here, there are a few hours left in which you can, if you want to, ask for a free copy of the August promotional gift that we're offering as our way of saying thank you when you make a 100% tax-deductible gift of literally any size to the Cornwall Alliance. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, in the comments field, write in promo code 21-08. That's promo code 21-08, or the title, Not in Our Backyard. And we'll send you a copy of this wonderful study by Robert Bryce on how people in especially rural areas are fighting back against attempts to place massive numbers of wind turbines or solar arrays close to their homes, causing a variety of health problems as well as reducing their property value. Just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on donate, and we'll be delighted to send you a copy as you request it. Everyone tune in next week when our guest will be Dr. Ken Hapala, the president of the Science and Environmental Policy Project, discussing his recent article, Comments on Federal Scientific Integrity. Ken deals with the crucially important problem of federal agencies, especially the EPA, the Department of Interior, the Department of Energy, basing their regulatory actions on scientific research, the data and the computer codes to which are not available to other scientists for examination, for replication, and so on. And so this means a lack of accountability and a lack of the opportunity for science to do what science can do so well when it's free to do so, which is to examine hypotheses and to stack them up against real-world observations and see how they fare. As a result, Americans are basically being told by these agencies, trust us. Well, one of my political heroes, President Ronald Reagan, said, trust but verify. And that's what science is really all about. The Apostle Paul told us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. That's the attitude of any good scientist, should be the attitude of every Christian, and I hope it will be your attitude as well. So we look forward to seeing you next week, and meanwhile, thanks so much for joining us tonight for our birthday celebration.